Good morning everybody and welcome to this meeting of Mid-Suffolk District Council Cabinet. I'm Councillor Susie Morley, Leader of Mid-Suffolk District Council, and I'm chairing this meeting today. May I remind you of some domestic arrangements? Please ensure that you maintain social distancing from all other persons whilst in the chamber and in the communal areas. Please ensure you wear a face covering at all times unless you're sitting down or if you're exempt from doing so, and that you use the hand sanitizer and wipes provided. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use. Please do not interrupt other speakers or hold separate conversations whilst others are speaking. If you're attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones are on silent or switched off. And finally, we will be using e-voting for this meeting on the modern.gov app, so please could members make sure they are logged in and ready to use this app. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and/or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. I'm now going to move to the agenda, please. Item 1, apologies for absence.
Good morning and thank you, Chair. We have no apologies from any members. However, the Assistant Director for Economic Development and Regeneration has forwarded her apologies, and the Assistant Director for Environment and Commercial Partnership will be here in her stead.
Thank you very much. Item 2, to receive declarations of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest by members. Are there any to declare? Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you. Yes, for item number 10, I'm a Councillor Director on Gateway 14, which is non-pecuniary interest.
Okay, thank you very much. Item 3, MCA/21/46, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of March 2022. Are there any points regarding the accuracy of the minutes? Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Flatman, thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Haddingham, thank you very much. The Governance Officer will now conduct the vote.
Thank you, Chair. The vote is now in progress. Councillor Flatman, yes. Are you all right? 4, okay. And Councillor Fleming? 4. That is 9 votes for, Chair. That's unanimous. No, it's not actually. There's 8 votes for and 1 abstention.
Okay, thank you.
But it's it's carried.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Item 4, to receive notifications of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received.
Thank you. Item 5, questions by councillors.
None received, Chair.
Item 6, matters referred by the Overview and Scrutiny or the Joint Audit and Standards Committees.
There are no such matters referred, Chair.
Thank you. Item 7, the forthcoming decisions list. Does anybody have any comments? Item 8 is MCA/21/47 and is the Council Tax Energy Rebate Scheme for 2022/23. And I'm going to invite the Cabinet Member for Finance to introduce this report.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm pleased to provide a brief introduction to report MCA 2147 on the Council Tax Energy Rebate 2022-23. I expect all of us here have received details from our energy suppliers of the very significant increases to both gas and electric energy tariffs, as well as large increases in the standing charges coming into effect from the 1st of April. Eye-watering increases of 50% plus. The government has announced a rebate of £150 for all households where the primary residence is valued in council tax bands A to D. Mid-Suffolk has been allocated £5,199,300, which will cover 34,662 households, and the government has asked this be paid as soon as possible from April. Approximately 75% of households in bands A to D properties in Mid-Suffolk pay by direct debit, and after their first council tax payment for 22-23 has been received in April, therefore verifying those bank details as valid and up to date, the council, via the Shared Revenues Partnership, will pay out the £150 rebate. For an estimated 8,432 households in bands A to D, we will first need to obtain bank details before being able to process these rebates. The government is expecting that payments will all have been made from this main scheme by the 30th of September this year. In addition, there will be a second discretionary scheme. Here we've been allocated £161,250, or the equivalent of a further 1,075 lots of £150. This is to support those suffering financial hardship as a result of the rising cost of living. It can top up payments to come in bands A to D, or for households in the higher valued bands E to H that are income-related benefits. The government expects this discretionary scheme to be paid out by the 30th of November this year. The Council is required to create a discretionary policy for the administration of this funding, and given the short timeline to get all this in place, Cabinet is asked to give authority to the Assistant Director for Corporate Resources to agree, in consultation with myself as Cabinet Member for Finance, a discretionary council tax energy policy. It will, of course, be in full accordance with the relevant government guidelines, and this is set out in Recommendation 3.1 of the report. Recommendation 3.2 gives authority to the Shared Revenues Partnership Operations Manager, Andrew Wilcock, to administer both the council tax energy rebate and the discretionary policy, and therefore I'd like to propose both those recommendations and would ask for someone to second those recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Brewster. Do we have any questions from members, Cabinet members? No? Any questions from any other members? Councillor Field?
Thank you. A question that was sort of forwarded via me, so bear with me. It said, it's actually from Councillor Otten indirectly. The government, it says, I know I asked the question about government fuel payments, but I've now heard that they will be paid to landlords if tenants pay council tax with rent to the landlord. What's Mid-Suffolk going to do to avoid the money not going to the tenant? So
Councillor Whitehead?
Yeah, perhaps I could direct that to Andrew Wilcock, who's here, but it's a technical question.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The government have changed the guidance recently, so we can't pay it to landlords. It has to be paid to those where it's their sole and main residence. So I think that's where we need to look at the discretionary scheme to support those in accommodation like HMOs potentially if they're suffering hardship. So we won't be paying directly to landlords. So.
okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to open this up for debate. Does anybody want to start the conversation? No? Okay, So the recommendations are that Cabinet gives authority to the Assistant Director for Corporate Resources, in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Finance, to agree the discretionary council tax energy policy in accordance with the relevant government guidelines, and that Cabinet gives authority to the Shared Revenues Partnership Operations Manager to administer the scheme for the council tax energy rebate and the discretionary council tax energy policy. And I now ask the Governance Officer to conduct the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. That is 9 votes for, Chair. That's carried.
Excellent, thank you. Item 9, MCA/21/48, is the Baber and Mid-Suffolk District Council Sustainable Travel Vision and Local Cycling and Walking Infrastructure Plan, known to its friends as the LCWIP. And I now invite Cabinet Member for the Environment to introduce this report. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, and I think I'll stand actually because I can be probably heard better. I'm very pleased to introduce this paper for your endorsement today. A lot of work has gone into preparing the draft LCWIP, which we have before us. By way of background, the LCWIP is a national government recommended tool and is developed in accordance with the Department for Transport technical guidance. It lays out priorities for active travel infrastructure and investment. The County Council also has its own LCWIP, as have many other local authorities, or they're developing them. The LCWIP has been developed, that we see before us now, through consultation with the public, with the parishes and with communities. And quite a large number of schemes have come forward. The scoring process then has been completed on the projects, and the scoring has used the active mode appraisal tool, which the DFT recommends. And this generates a cost-benefit ratio based on potential trips versus delivery costs, and is used to prioritize the list of schemes. Those with the higher BCRs may be developed further to prepare them for future funding bids. Schemes with a lower BCR, however, still remain relevant, as they may benefit from local funding. And particularly in rural areas, the prioritization approach that we want to use will deviate and has deviated a little bit from the strict DFT approach, in that it's not just about numbers. It is also about need and alternatives, which for rural areas alters the whole context a little bit. Our scoring mechanism has been agreed by a series of meetings with a cross-party group. The working group has, after quite a bit of discussion, agreed in principle for how these schemes should be prioritised. For instance, we prioritise criteria such as proximity to schools, public transport, and places of work. And we've also taken into account alternatives, because what we found was, using the strict DFT method, urban areas tended to outscore the rural areas, and that issue needed to be addressed, and we have tried to address that as much as possible. I would like to stress that the list of schemes does remain dynamic. It will be regularly reassessed, especially with regard to new policies, strategies, or funding sources. So there will always be an opportunity for tweaks and additions. This is a living document. And I think if you turn to page 44 in the papers, you can see where that is presented. Now, clearly there won't be enough money to fund everything, and that's probably a massive understatement. So there will be disappointments. Putting in these schemes is very expensive, and schemes may not meet the criteria for DFT funding, but there may still be a high need for them within our rural communities. So these are the kind of things that we need to grapple with, taking this forward. The programme is at an early stage, and I hope that our Cabinet today will endorse the approach and add confidence to the sustainable travel vision, thus enabling officers to pursue funding avenues and the delivery of valuable new infrastructure. So thank you. And thank you to officers for all the hard work. Catherine, you worked immensely hard on this. So thank you very much.
Councillor Richardson? Thank you. Do we have any questions from Cabinet? Councillor Brewster?
Support the principle of this, of the paper in its all, you know, in its being. I do have a really difficult concern because while I've met in Stowmarket, it must be on 4 or maybe even 5 occasions with officers to look at the Ipswich Street. Now, Ipswich Street, I did a lot of research on it, and for safety reasons, I've always said at every meeting that if Ipswich Street comes into being, then I can't put my name to it. And that's on grounds of safety, because the carriageway in Ipswich Street is just 4 metres wide. It's measured between the bollards. There's about 60 mil on each width, which is taken up by curb provision. Yes. The width measurement of a transit van, which was going through, and I realise I will be coming to a question, Madam Chair, the width measurement of a transit van, which I got measured up when I was there, in the street was 2.4 metres to its mirrors. Ipswich Street, as I said, is just 4 metres wide. There's a one-way street, and what is in the papers, there's nothing to say the agreements or the temporary agreements, I suppose, we made, and everyone did seem to agree that it was unsafe. But in the papers for Ipswich Street, improved signage to cyclists in the one-way system to improve lighting and improvement of lighting for walkers. There is nothing about the diversion that we were looking at. I will vote for this. However, I do need some written work arriving at me to recognise that those meetings came to some conclusions. And that is the question I have.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Brewster. Catherine or Cassandra, are you able to respond?
Thank you, Councillor Brewster. So our list of schemes within our LCWIP currently flags up what there is public desire for and what the public have put forward as suggestions through our consultation. So the detail that you see in our lists is what we've gathered through that community consultation, but further investigation into what exactly, what kind of infrastructure improvements are needed on the ground would have to be undertaken by the Highways Authority. So whilst we're flagging up locations where there's been a desire for attention, the finer details of the scheme, including safety considerations and the feasibility of how it would actually be implemented, would need to be carried out by the Highways Authority. So as and when they consider schemes to bring forwards, that would be worked out in much more detail by engineers and designers. So it might be that the scheme looks a little differently to what members of the public suggested when it comes to implementation.
Thank you. Catherine, can you just confirm that you have got Councillor Brewster's, if you like, written submissions that he's made to you in the past? You've got those on file and they can be utilised as and when necessary.
Yes, yeah, and I can get back to you in writing on that.
Lovely. Thank you. Anybody else got any questions? Councillor Gould?
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm going to be slightly cheeky and put in a point I would have put in debate into a question as well. But and that is simply to say a big thank you to Councillor Fleming and the officers for bringing this forward. I think it's very much to be welcomed. And looking at my own ward in particular, which is set, so population of I set to grow considerably and to expand physically as a town, and the importance of the connectivity within the town and walking and cycling routes is incredibly important. And that's not just us as public elected and officials saying that. Actually, there are keen interests, as Catherine will know, within the town itself to see more routes made available. So this is very much to be welcomed. So the questions are really confirmation of the ability to add schemes into the programme as it progresses. And the other question is really a wider one about this focus that the DFT has and has always had in its different iterations on urban settings rather than rural settings, which means we're faced with specifications for schemes and the distribution of central government money, which is very much biased towards the urban. So it's really to ask Councillor Fleming if she sees opportunities for taking those arguments forward and being able to do something about the distribution of resources back to the county, if at all possible. Thanks.
Councillor Fleming?
Yes, thank you. And I think it was very apparent when we came to look at some of the schemes on the ground that in order to obtain DFT funding, their specifications are pretty inflexible and not always very suitable for rural areas. Things like going around trees and a little bit of lumpiness here and there. We in the countryside take for granted, but apparently DFT doesn't. But I think a broader message is for the government when it allocates funds locally and regionally, that they've got to loosen up on the constrictions and constraints that come with those funds. And that's got to be part of what devolution really means. That's got to be part of what we ask for as part of the county deal. And, that would go for the county council. I know we've talked about it at the county council, and all local authorities should be asking, when they receive money from central government, we need to make the decisions, more or less, on the detailed parts anyway, as much as possible here and not in Westminster. And I think if that message could be taken as part of our negotiation for the county deal, it'd be really helpful in all kinds of ways.
Councillor Richardson? We're still in questions.
Yes, no, I've got a quick question for Councillor Fleming, if that's okay. I think I know the answer to this, but I just want sort of absolute clarity, because in your introduction you mentioned that the LCWIP is a recommended toolkit. Is that, effectively, does that mean it's not something that's compulsory for us to do, that we've elected to do because we think there's value in it? Am I right in thinking that?
If I could answer first, and then maybe I'll go to Catherine to confirm. But my understanding is we need to, the way we review and prioritise our schemes needs to be broadly consistent with the way other local authorities assessing their schemes. We need to follow the basic matrix, and if we don't, then we probably won't be looked well upon when it comes to certain funding sources. But that doesn't say there isn't a bit of flexibility in it for us, especially with local schemes or schemes that we aren't, that we're partially funding ourselves. Perhaps officers could elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, so to answer that question, it isn't compulsory to have an LCWIP, but it is very much recommended by national government as a means to secure funding. So they will be looking at authorities with LCWIPs in place more favourably when it comes to active travel funding allocations. And as well as sort of the national government recommendation, districts and boroughs throughout Suffolk have been encouraged by Suffolk County Council Highways to develop their own LCWIPs, because these are going to be informing, enhancing and advising the county-wide LCWIP with a much sort of stronger evidence-based and more local knowledge.
Thank you. I've got a question of my own, actually. What is the process by which members of the public will be able to carry on asking for amendments to these sites that we put forward? In order for it to be really meaningful, we need to keep encouraging members of the public to actually keep putting forward schemes for us. How will that work? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So, although our public consultation that we ran to develop this starting up list has now closed and therefore gives us a snapshot in time, we do recognise that that is indeed a snapshot in time and needs to be reviewed and assessed regularly to keep it up to date and relevant. So our online consultation website will actually remain, even though the consultation is closed for input, it remains live with a news and project update facility, so that anybody interested in the development of it has, up-to-date news subscriptions to how the delivery of the LCWIP goes, when schemes do get implemented, and there'll be contact details on there to get in touch with us if they feel that they need to flag up new schemes that weren't captured in the first consultation. So really, an open conversation with us about things that arise going forwards. And when the LCWIP is published on our website as well, there will be contact information to get in touch with us to raise awareness of anything that perhaps wasn't captured already to be added to the lists.
Excellent news, thank you. And we did have a really good response to the consultation, didn't we, with over 1,800 people replying and sending in information. So that was really successful, and I think we need to continue to promote that. Thank you very much. Moving into, Councillor Byrne.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think probably you partially answered one of the questions which I had, which was what's the mechanism or machinery exists to monitor and report on the progress of achieving this rather impressive list that you have here. And a more important question for me, however, would be what's the procedure, what's the likely procedure for assessing the extent to which the scheme has been successful? That, I think, is the more important one. The rate of success, anyway, has got to be got to be taken into account. Have you got anything you can tell me about that? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Byrne. So going forwards, we will be working very closely with Suffolk County Highways to oversee how we can progress with the implementation of these schemes. So they'll always keep us well informed about which schemes are being delivered. And when they do implement a scheme, it will be their responsibility to follow up with monitoring about, how that that piece of infrastructure is used and whether it's successful in terms of road safety, mitigation of hazards, and just, you know, the number of cycling or walking trips that are used, are utilising that piece of infrastructure. So that will, you know, we will work with Suffolk County Council Highways to ensure that that monitoring is being fed back to us.
Thank you very much. So moving now into debate. Oh, sorry. Councillor Whelan.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of questions. I wish I could make them as statements because I think it would be more helpful if I did. But anyway, am I allowed to welcome the report and the vision document and the lists? I just wondered whether within the vision document there should be a reference to the electric buses in mid-Suffolk. I think they perhaps should be referred to in the vision, and as their services are developed, I think the walking schemes may need to be developed to fit into them. There's a question in there somewhere, I think. Some of the schemes in the list could do with a bit more clarification, I think, before this is submitted. And
Councillor Whelan, what is your question?
the first question was, should the vision document make reference to the electric buses that Mid-Suffolk are providing, and would it be possible to develop the walking schemes and the electric bus services alongside each other so that they feed into each other? A simple yes would do.
I'd rather keep the questions relating to the LCWIP, which is cycling and walking. I don't feel the need for mentioning of buses in the cycling and walking strategy.
Okay.
Councillor Fleming, just one moment. Councillor Fleming.
I just very briefly comment on that one of the scoring criteria for schemes is whether they link to public transport nodes. And so I think, you know, if and when, you know, the buses, you know, established, when we know where those key locations are, absolutely yes. That's why this is a living document. And I think it already envisions connection to transport nodes as being, you know, a high priority in terms of assessing schemes.
Cass, did you want to add to that?
It was just to say that at the moment the vision isn't set in stone, however we are very happy with where it is. There is reference in there to community transport already, so I think that's kind of trying to capture all of that without making it too lengthy a vision.
Thank you. Councillor Whelan, did you have another question?
Yeah, I have, sorry. I was going to ask if it would be possible if the lists could be put in, the comments in the list could be put in boxes. I think when the public see this, it will be easier for them to read if they are. And I know the section on updating, will planning officers be consulted regularly and vice versa as you know, section 106s and conditions and so on are made and the works come to fruition. And similarly county councillors, because county councillors have a locality fund and they may be able to put some money in towards some of these schemes to help them along.
Thank you. Catherine?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Whelan. To answer your first question about the formatting of the comments, yeah, we can put those in boxes to make that clearer to read. So that is an amendment that I can work on for you. And then in terms of how the LCWIP is utilised within the planning authority, we absolutely want our planning directorate and colleagues within there to utilise the LCWIP as a tool going forwards. So following endorsement, there will be a briefing to our planning colleagues to explain to them, you know, what exactly the LCWIP is and how it was brought together and how they can utilise it going forwards. And it's hoped that they will use this as a sort of cross-referencing tool when they are looking at applications to see whether there are schemes in the near vicinity that could benefit with some developer funding. So that is, an applied use of the LCWIP as well.
Thank you very much.
I have one more question. It is simply this. Could the scheme in East Berkholt be moved from the Mid-Suffolk list to the Baber list? With that, I will keep quiet.
I'm sure that will happen. Councillor Field.
Thank you. Similarly, if I maybe indulge two questions, one's a bit techie and the other one's about other things. First of all, on page 30 of our papers, it talks about the average petrol or diesel car on the road in the UK uses the equivalent of 180 grams of CO2 per kilometre. And in comparison, the average bus produces 82. Could the officer confirm that figure's correct? Because I think it's important for people's understanding of the paper. I find it a bit difficult to imagine an 8 or 15 or 50-seater or whatever bus using less than half the CO2 of an average car. And there's a point on the bottom of that page, as I'm talking about the right-hand side of the page, that talks about buses with 7 passengers is more fuel efficient than one car. That sounds much more sensible. It's quoted per mile rather than per kilometre, just to be different. But really looking for officer comment on which of those two is correct. If they're both correct, I'll withdraw my question. But if they're not, I think for the interest of people's understanding, the point should be made accurate. So that's one question. The second question really is about the process for looking at these various schemes. I obviously had a quick look through those in my area, and there seems to be a number of cases where there are what looks like misunderstandings of what actually people were requesting, and it's really a matter of then how are we going to go back to local people, not just saying local councillors, but local people, to get a clear understanding of what they want and just exactly what's involved. So there's I'm reluctant to use parochial examples, but there's comments there about improving Blue Barn Lane in Great Blakenham, which is a mud footpath, to my mind, little used, except when county education are trying to get kids to walk along it. So that's the sort of place where you need a clear understanding of what you're trying to achieve, and I think local views would be valuable. So that's it. 2 questions.
Thank you. Catherine?
Thank you. So to answer the first question on the accuracy, I'm afraid that's slightly too techie to answer here. Officers are confident that that is correct. However, I'll go away and make sure that we get a proper answer out to Councillor Field after the meeting, if that's okay. And then on the second question, so all of the details that have come in are direct from the public, so it is their view. So it may be what's perceived as a little used footpath, but actually might be more, or it might just be for those people that they use it. However, through Commonplace, we have got all the people's contact details that put stuff through to us. So, there's going to be ongoing conversation back and forth in terms of making sure these schemes are right, updating on what's actually happening and which are being taken forward. So we can always make sure if there are any that you think look a bit odd or you want a bit of sense checking, we can always go back and double check that.
Thank you. Councillor Mellon?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question on funding. Obviously, one of the most significant pots of funding that we have available for us is SIL, but as far as I understand it, SIL is not permitted to be used for highways works. So can I ask, can any of the projects in this list be funded from SIL, and is that likely to change so they could be funded in the future? Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So there is potential for schemes to be funded by SIL, and that is something I'm working with already with our SIL colleagues, because we've identified actually that some of those schemes on the outskirts of Ipswich actually fall within the remit of the ISPA traffic mitigation strategy, which is looking for SIL funding. So that is one mechanism in which SIL can help us deliver to some of those schemes. I believe it will be location dependent going forwards, but it isn't the case that SIL can't fund any of those schemes. There is opportunities, and now that we've gathered and consolidated and prioritised the schemes, we can really work with our SIL colleagues to establish which schemes can benefit from that funding.
Councillor Miller?
Just a quick follow-up, if that's okay, Chair. Is that designation of something being a highway operation, even when perhaps it's a footpath which doesn't actually go anywhere near a highway? That's the one I think that frustrates people perhaps the most.
Yes, there is a little bit of a difference. So highways will be anything near or alongside a carriageway, but when we are talking about off-road footpaths, that is more within the remit of the County Council's rights of way team. So with our sort of both rural and urban landscape, we are going to be working with both of those teams.
Thank you. So now we're going to move into debate. I think we've already done some of that, but Councillor Richardson, start us off.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a few points I'd like to make, if I may. Firstly, just to reiterate what Councillor Fleming has said, to thank our officers involved for the work that they've done, particularly Catherine Davies, our Sustainable Travel Officer, given that it has been a huge amount of work put into producing this document over, I think, the best part of a year. And the reason I asked about whether or not it was compulsory is not because it was a trick question, but just simply I can see how some other organisations or district councils, borough councils, looking at just how much work is involved, how much effort is involved. When it's not compulsory, you might think, well, we don't have to do it, let's not bother. That hasn't been our attitude here, and I think that's absolutely right, especially because of the opportunities it provides to secure that additional funding. And I have to say, I think that's one area where we are really strong as a district council, and it's been securing additional investment into our district or match funding in other areas. So I think that's particularly welcome. I also think, as a concept, this is, I think, a really valuable piece of work in providing that coherent strategic approach to walking and cycling across our districts, and sets out the priorities for the short, medium and long term in a way that I think is really easy for people to comprehend and to understand, particularly when it comes to joining up some of the existing infrastructure that we've got across the district. And particularly, obviously, important is the fact that it takes into account the views of local residents in putting forward their preferences for their areas. So I welcome the strong emphasis on the public consultation aspect of this, especially in the context of being able to reiterate this sort of, or further iterate this document in the future to ensure that it is a live, dynamic plan that keeps into account and into consideration the views of local people, particularly when those schemes are sort of further developed with the input from highways and others. And then the last point I just want to make, obviously, as you probably expect, is just to re-emphasise how important active travel and physical exercise is as part of the wellbeing strategy we agreed last September. I think one of the things that we really strongly emphasised at the time was that the wellbeing strategy is not designed just to be a standalone document, that it's there and that's the end of it. The real kind of emphasis from the wellbeing agenda that we have as a council is embedding that ethos into all of our work across multiple different teams, cabinet portfolios. And I think the emphasis that this document has, just in terms of its general concept and what it's trying to achieve, is a really good example of delivering that in practice. So for that reason, hence why I was more than happy to second the recommendations in the report. So I really welcome this, and again, thank all those involved for bringing this forward and look to see how it develops in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Okay, so the recommendations are that the Joint Council's draft LCWIP and Sustainable Transport Vision are endorsed, and that the completion of the final documentation is delegated to the Assistant Director for Economic Development and Regeneration in consultation with portfolio holders for environment. I'm now going to ask the Governance Officer to conduct the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The vote is now in progress. Councillor Gould. Are you?
Frozen up there. 4.
Thank you. That is 9 votes for, Chair. That's carried.
Excellent. Well done, everybody. Thank you. Item 10 is MCA/21/49, is the Freeport East full business case. And I'm going to invite the Cabinet Member for Economy to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll give you a background first. The announced in March 2021 budget, Freeports are a flagship HM government programme that play an important part in the UK's post-COVID and post-Brexit economic recovery. There are 3 main government policy objectives. The first, to boost trade and investment. Freeports will become national hubs for global trade and investment. The second one, drive innovation, including net zero. Freeports will create hotbeds for innovation with an aim of attracting investment to develop and trial new ideas and technologies. The third one, deliver jobs, skills and levelling up. Freeports will deliver government's levelling up agenda by bringing jobs, investment and high-value opportunities to some of our most deprived communities. Business will benefit from generous tax reliefs and simplified customs procedures, while local communities, businesses and the Freeport sites will benefit from investment in skills, innovation and trade as part of the wider funding package. Now to Freeport East, as we know it at the moment. Freeport East covers 275 hectares of development land across Suffolk and North Essex, including Gateway 14, which is a tax and could be a customs site, and Port 1 in Great Blakenham, which is a customs site. The aim of Freeport East is to create a manufacturing, green energy and innovation hub that capitalises on the unique qualities of the eastern region, which will provide space for UK businesses and inward investors to develop new products and processes while creating new jobs for our residents and supporting the growth of our economy locally. As part of the designation process, Freeport East have developed and had approved an outline business case and tax site designation, meaning that Freeport is now live. The final stage of this process is development of a full business case, which will be submitted to government on the 15th of April. This full business case has now been developed by a number of partner organisations collaborating on working groups which set out how Freeport East objectives will be delivered. Mid-Suffolk officers have been heavily involved with the work of these groups and continue to help shape the final submission, whilst the leader of the council and myself have attended the shadow board to stay informed on progress. The inclusion of Gateway 14 as a tax site has meant that 100% of the business rates receipts for all development on this site will be retained locally for the next 25 years. This will be split into pots, some of which we will be able to reinvest in Gateway 14 to deliver added value for this landmark development, most notably bringing forward development of the Innovation and Skills Centre and the funding additional net zero initiatives on site. Additionally, once the full business case has been approved by government, a share of the 25 million seed funding will be made available to support additional investment in these projects on Gateway 14. Members are asked to agree the recommendations contained in the report prepared by officers and put on record our support for this once-in-a-generation opportunity for our communities and businesses. So I recommend and propose the recommendations at 3.1, 32, 33, 34 and 35. And look for a seconder, please.
Thank you, Councillor Brewster. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Whitehead?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. As I said at the start of the meeting, I've been a councillor director on Gateway 14 actually since its inception, and this development with the Freeport East, I believe, is a really exciting opportunity. It really is the icing on the cake for our site in Stowe Market, because the tax and customs advantages for businesses and the ability of the councils to retain business rates is a real bonus. So I'm very happy to second the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Do we have any questions from Cabinet? From anybody else? Councillor Mellon?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have 4 questions. Hope that's okay. The first 2 probably I can put together. Can we confirm that established local firms would not be able to open an office in Gateway 14? And secondly, will companies operating outside the Freeport be competitively disadvantaged compared to those benefiting from the tax advantages inside?
Michelle with us this morning, and I think she is better prepared for a lot of these questions than probably I am, having only sort of got into it a little bit later.
Thank you, Chair. The first question, I can relatively easily confirm that established companies within the local area, if they choose to locate on Gateway 14, if they are growing their business and adding additional staff or additional investment in their business, will still be eligible for the benefits that come with the Gateway 14 tax site designation. What government are looking to do is to ensure that the designation and the associated financial benefits that it brings do not encourage businesses to relocate simply in order to access those financial benefits. So what they're looking for us to work with businesses who may be interested in relocation is to ensure that there is added growth and that it is not just simply displacement of jobs from one site to another. We are working very closely with the team at Gateway 14 and JNIC in order to be able to manage any inquiries that come through from local businesses, and any that have been received so far are very clear that they fit the criteria for significant growth. So that I wouldn't have any major concerns, but what it would also do in a secondary benefit locally is encourage churn in the market. So potentially by a business moving on to Gateway 14, it frees up additional development site within the wider geography that would be available for other businesses to move into as well. In terms of the potential disadvantage for businesses that are not on the Gateway 14 site and therefore not able to access financial benefits, there is as part of the business rate retention programme that Councillor Brewster referred to, there is something called a Pot C, which is an investment fund that's available for investment to support the wider geographic area that includes the majority of Suffolk and North Essex. Once that programme is set up, it will be able to support investment, trade, skills and development opportunities for businesses and geographies outside of the main tax sites. So whilst the businesses themselves wouldn't necessarily get the same financial incentives as those that are on a tax site, it doesn't mean that there won't be any opportunities available for businesses and for investment in the wider support.
Thank you. Councillor Miller?
Thanks for that clarification. And 2 further questions then. Councillor Brewster mentioned about the Freeport being a green energy hub, and there's a lot about hydrogen in the prospectus, and particularly for the Harwich component of the Freeport. What measures will be used at Gateway 14 to ensure it is carbon neutral? And then my last question is, previously we heard a lot about Gateway 14 including a food enterprise zone, but this seems to have gone quiet. Is it still included? Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle?
Thank you. I will potentially leave a number of our councillors who are also on the Gateway 14 board to jump in if there are any areas that they feel I haven't covered. In terms of the Gateway 14 site, we're looking at a number of energy and sustainability initiatives to be included, including the development of an on-site energy network, IDNO, I think the technical term is. We're ensuring that all of the buildings are solar ready, so they have the ability for solar panels to be added to the roofs. We're looking at battery technology. We're looking at some of the buildings, particularly the Innovation and Skills Centre, to be net zero and an exemplar building. There are significant commitments already made by Gateway 14 Limited as part of the planning permission for some of those initiatives. And what we're looking to do through the Freeport designation is to extend and enhance the net zero offer on site through some of the seed capital and the retained business rates to make sure that we're providing some added value for the development. In terms of the Food Enterprise Zone designation, that was a designation made by DEFRA in 2018, I think it may have been. That designation hasn't disappeared, and neither has the Enterprise Zone designation that was conferred in 2016. What government have said is that ultimately businesses will get the choice as to which of the three designations that they choose to work under. What that means in practice is that certainly for the next 5 years, financial incentives for businesses will only be available under the Freeport designation, and therefore we would expect that most businesses would choose that route rather than the Food Enterprise Zone or the Enterprise Zone designation. However, we are still very keen to encourage food manufacturing businesses to locate on Gateway 14 as part of that legacy from the Food Enterprise Zone designation. So still working to create a food cluster.
Thank you. Now I'm going to open it up for debate. Does anybody wish to start us off?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear. Are we starting debate?
Debate, yes.
Sorry, yeah. I can say something, if that's... Thank you. Well, I just want to say that I really welcome this this whole project to Mid-Suffolk and to Suffolk. I think it's a really great achievement for this region to have Freeport East and especially for Stowmarket to be part of it. There is great synergy here with the development of energy in the region, and emergence of this region as a nationally important centre for generating low-carbon energy and related technologies. So I think we're in the brink of something here that's really very exciting. But as this develops in the future, I would like to see some more green, quote-unquote, aspects that aren't considered viable now, possibly brought in, and I think we need to keep our eye on them. And I'd like to see, for instance, all of the available roof space used for generating solar energy. I don't understand why solar energy can be viable on green agricultural fields, but not on brown fields and on roof space. There's something really fundamentally wrong with the way this whole program is being funded and supported, where we've ended up with a situation like this. So I would really urge change there. And of course, I would like to see a rail connection. I hope one day that will prove viable. Apparently it isn't now, but with the way fuel prices and changes in priorities may evolve in the future, I think we need to keep that option open. Anyway, very pleased to be able to support this paper. Thank you.
Thank you. So the recommendations 3.1, that the submission of Freeport East full business case be endorsed, that the Assistant Director of Economy and Regeneration and the Section 151 officer be given delegated authority in consultation with the Leader of the Council and the Cabinet members for Finance and Economy to finalise the detail on the Freeport East full business case on behalf of Mid-Suffolk District Council, that the proposed incorporation model for Freeport East, i.e. a company limited by guarantee, be approved, and that Cabinet make a recommendation to full Council on nomination for a Mid-Suffolk District Council Director, and that the retained business rates policy be approved in principle, that forward funding from the Growth and Efficiency Fund of £80,000 per year for 2 years in advance of the retained business rates be approved. And I'll now ask the Governance Officer to conduct the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. Councillor Gould?
Sorry, still frozen. 4.
Thank you. That is 9 votes for, Chair. That's carried.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. So the date and time of the next meeting is scheduled for Monday the 9th of May at 10:30. Meeting's closed at 11:32. Thank you, everybody, for attending.